The gunshot split the air so fast, I didn't even hear the trigger pull, just the echo bouncing between the houses and the sharp, yelping cry that followed. My heart stopped before my body could move. Max, my golden retriever, my trained service dog, my lifeline, collapsed on the freshly cut grass, his harness twisted under him. I was halfway down the sidewalk when I saw her, Karen. HOA board president, self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, standing there with a pistol still raised, her hand trembling not from fear but from rage. The smell of burnt gunpowder clung to the breeze, mixing with the scent of blooming magnolias. Neighbors froze in their yards, kids holding their bikes, parents gripping grocery bags. I dropped to my knees beside Max, my hands fumbling over his fur, feeling the warmth leaving his body. His eyes were still on me, trusting, loyal, not understanding why his world had suddenly turned sideways. My vision blurred, not from the spring sunlight but from the tears that burned down my cheeks. Why? My voice cracked, the question more of a cry than a demand. Karen didn't flinch. "That animal's dangerous," she spat, her voice loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear. "You've been warned about bringing him near the HOA playground." He lunged at a child. "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking now from something deeper, the kind of fury that could freeze you still or make you move faster than thought. Max had been with me through seizures, through public appearances, through the worst days of my PTSD. He was trained better than most people I knew. The flashing lights came quicker than I expected. 2 police cruisers rolled in, sirens fading as they stopped. Officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. Karen straightened her back like she was the victim here. And in that moment, kneeling beside my bleeding dog, with neighbors whispering and cops approaching, I remembered something Karen didn't know. I wasn't just any neighbor. I wasn't just another target for her endless HOA harassment. I was a sitting member of the United States Congress. And when a congressman's service dog is shot in cold blood, that doesn't just make the evening news. That pulls the kind of strings that shake the whole tree. But what the crowd didn't know, what even Karen didn't realize, was that the shock of that gunshot was only the beginning. Because I had been watching the HOA for months. I knew things about their finances, about Karen's own shady dealings, that could ruin careers and land people in prison. I just didn't expect it to start with Max's blood on the sidewalk. 3 months earlier, things had been almost peaceful. I had moved into the Lakewood Estates subdivision partly because it was quiet, partly because it was only 20 minutes from D.C. And mostly because the neighborhood backed up to a small park where Max could walk me through panic attacks without curious strangers gawking. The HOA dues were high, sure, but I could afford them. I figured paying for manicured lawns and a decent neighborhood watch was a small trade-off for privacy. Max was more than a pet. He was my shield against the invisible. When I lost my wife 2 years ago, it was Max who got me out of bed every morning. When the flashbacks hit in the middle of speeches or late-night sessions, it was Max's steady pressure against my leg that kept me grounded. He didn't bark unless I was in trouble. He didn't run unless I told him to. And yet, somehow, from the moment we arrived, Karen made it her mission to hate him. It started with petty notes: dogs not allowed off-leash in common areas, slipped into my mailbox even though Max never left my side. Then it was bogus citations: pet waste left in community garden when Max hadn't even been near it. The first time I met her in person, she was blocking my driveway with her golf cart, arms folded, that thin smile stretched across her face like a rubber band ready to snap. "Congressman or not," she said, "you follow the rules like everyone else." I almost laughed. Not because I thought she was joking, but because she said it like she was the law. Like her laminated HOA bylaws had the same weight as the U.S. Constitution. Still, I let it go. I had bigger battles to fight, bills to pass, constituents to help, veterans to support. And maybe, just maybe, I thought ignoring her would make her stop. It didn't. One Thursday evening in April, I came home from a late meeting and found a notice taped to my door. Final warning: service animals must be registered with HOA board. Failure to comply will result in fines and possible removal. That was the first time I felt my hands tremble with anger. Service animals aren't pets under the law. The ADA doesn't require registration with an HOA. I could have written her a legal lecture right there on the sidewalk. Instead, I decided something else. I decided I was going to find out why she was so obsessed with control. And that decision, quiet, small, made under the porch light with Max leaning against my leg, would end up changing everything. Because a week later, I was invited to my first HOA meeting. And what I saw that night made me realize that Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was hiding something. The evening of the meeting, the community hall smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. About 20 residents sat in a loose circle of folding chairs, most of them bored, scrolling through phones. Karen sat at the front with a neat stack of folders and a smugness that could stop traffic. She started with the usual: landscaping updates, pool maintenance, budget reports. Then she moved to security issues, where she held up a blurry printed photo of Max and me walking past the HOA playground. "This," she said, "is the dog that lunged at a child." The room stirred. People whispered. My jaw clenched. I stood. "That's a lie. Max has never." "Congressman," she cut me off with a tight smile. "We'll let the record speak for itself." And that's when I noticed something strange. Every time she shuffled through her folders, she kept one thick blue binder close to her side, never opening it, never letting anyone else near it. Something about that binder made my gut twist. By the end of the meeting, I knew two things: Karen was building a case against me, and that binder probably held more than HOA rules. I just didn't know that before I could get my hands on it, she'd decide to take out her problem another way. It was a warm Saturday morning when I stepped outside to walk Max. The sky was clear, the air smelled faintly of fresh mulch, and for a few minutes, everything felt normal. Max trotted happily beside me, tail swaying, his harness strapped warm in my hand. We turned the corner toward the park, passing kids on scooters and neighbors watering flowers. That's when I heard the sharp voice behind us. "Get that dog out of here." I turned. Karen was striding toward us, eyes narrowed, hand tucked into her jacket pocket. I opened my mouth to speak, to remind her for the 100th time that Max was a service dog, when she pulled something shiny from her pocket. And in that instant, everything slowed, the sunlight flashing off the metal, Max's ears perking, my breath catching in my chest. The sound came a heartbeat later. Bang! Max's body jerked as the bullet hit, his yelp cutting straight through me like glass. I dropped to the ground, scooping him up before his head could hit the pavement. His fur was warm, too warm, and wet where my hand pressed against his side. My ears rang, the world fading into a tunnel of sound where the only thing I could hear was his shallow breathing. Karen stood there frozen for a split second, gun still in her hand, then she lowered it slowly, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look sorry. She looked like someone who had just crossed a line she'd been itching to cross for months. The neighbors were shouting now, someone yelling to call 911, another telling their kids to go inside. I heard the screech of tires as a pickup turned onto the street. My hands were shaking as I cradled Max against me, his eyes still locked on mine like he was trying to reassure me when it should have been the other way around. A woman rushed forward, Mrs. Thompson from 3 houses down. "Give him to me. I'll get him to Dr. Hughes," she said, already pulling off her scarf to press against the wound. I hesitated for a second, then let her take him, watching helplessly as she ran toward her car. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Karen had stepped back now, trying to put on a mask of composure. "It was self-defense," she announced to no one in particular. "That animal has been a threat. You shot a service dog, I said, my voice low but carrying enough weight to make a few heads turn. My blood was cold now, my grief folding into something heavier, darker. And you're going to answer for it. The first cruiser screeched to a halt, 2 officers stepping out fast. One of them, Officer Harris, recognized me instantly, his eyes flicking between me and Karen before settling on the gun still in her hand. Ma'am, put the weapon down. Now. She hesitated, but when Harris's hand moved toward his own holster, she set the pistol on the hood of a nearby car. They took our statements separately, the other officer walking me toward the curb while Harris spoke to Karen. I kept glancing down the street, waiting for Mrs. Thompson's car to reappear. I didn't know if Max would make it. And I didn't want to think about what I'd do if he didn't. Harris's voice was careful when he came back to me. Congressman, do you want to press charges? I didn't even blink. Yes. And I want the ATF looped in. That pistol isn't registered. Harris nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. We'll file the report. But I have to warn you, these HOA disputes. This isn't an HOA dispute, I cut in. This is a federal matter now. Because what Harris didn't know, what almost no one here knew, was that I had been quietly gathering evidence on the HOA for months. Embezzlement. Misuse of community funds. Possible mail fraud. And Karen, as president, had her fingerprints all over it. The shooting had just given me the perfect opening to pull the trigger on a much bigger investigation. That night, after I got back from the emergency vet where Max was in surgery, I sat at my desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I pulled up the folder labeled Lakewood HOA Evidence and added a new file, Incident, Use of Deadly Force. By the time the sun came up, I had already sent a packet to the Office of the Inspector General, another to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and one more to a trusted journalist who owed me a favor. Karen thought this would scare me into silence. She had no idea she'd just started the clock on her own downfall. The next day, my phone rang at 7:04 a.m. It wasn't the vet. It wasn't the police. It was someone I hadn't spoken to in months, Special Agent Wallace from the Department of Justice. We got your file, he said. And Congressman, we've been looking at this HOA for a while. You just gave us probable cause to move in faster than we planned. I leaned back in my chair, the exhaustion still sitting heavy on my shoulders. How fast? Fast enough that Karen's not going to see it coming, he said. And in that moment, I realized something. The shot that almost killed Max had just set in motion something far bigger than Karen could handle. But I didn't know yet that the retaliation she'd unleash before the feds showed up would be even worse. Karen didn't waste a single day before striking back. Less than 24 hours after Special Agent Wallace's call, I woke to the sound of heavy thuds outside my front door. At first, I thought it was construction work somewhere down the street. But then came the pounding, deliberate, hard enough to make the frame rattle. I opened the door to find 3 men in neon vests unloading a stack of cinder blocks onto my driveway. One of them handed me a paper crumpled at the edges. Per HOA order, he said flatly, your driveway is being blocked until fines are paid. Fines? I scanned the paper. Apparently, in the span of 12 hours, I'd been cited for 7 different violations, each carrying a 3-figure fee. Weeds along the fence line, unauthorized structural changes for the ramp I'd had installed for Max's mobility training, non-compliance with community standards for having my porch light bulb in the wrong color temperature. This is illegal, I said, tossing the paper back at him. Get these blocks off my property before I call the county sheriff. The man didn't flinch. Take it up with the board. We're just doing our job. I stepped aside just enough to see Karen standing across the street, arms folded, a smile on her face so thin it could cut glass. She gave me a little wave, like she'd just won something. My blood ran hot, but I knew better than to give her a scene she could spin. I pulled out my phone, took photos, and called the sheriff's office. They said they'd send someone, but disputes with homeowners associations often got pushed to the bottom of the list unless there was violence involved. I almost laughed at the irony. There had been violence. My dog was still in the hospital because of her. By mid-morning, the sheriff's deputy finally showed up. He took one look at the cinder blocks and sighed. "Congressman, I can't order them removed without a court order. Best I can do is write it up for trespassing if the HOA can't produce proof they own this driveway." Karen, of course, came over with a stack of property maps and a smug tone. "The easement clause allows for temporary obstruction in the event of unpaid community debts," she said, practically singing the words. The deputy gave me a look that said his hands were tied. I knew then that fighting her in the open like this was exactly what she wanted, a public tug-of-war that made her look like she was enforcing rules while painting me as a rogue resident. No. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the next move buried her so deep she wouldn't see daylight again. That night, after the blocks were still sitting in my driveway like a wall of defiance, I drove out the back way to meet with a man named Rick. Rick wasn't law enforcement, not officially. But he had friends who worked in federal records, and he owed me from a time I'd helped his brother get an honorable discharge corrected. "You're telling me you want everything on this woman?" Rick asked, sliding a folder across the diner table toward me. "Everything on her and the rest of that board," I said. "Emails, financial transfers, anything that links them to misuse of funds. The feds are already circling. I want them to land with enough force to make an earthquake." Rick smirked, opening his laptop. "Then you're going to love this. She's been moving HOA funds into a private account under her cousin's name. And that's just the appetizer." I was halfway through reading the printouts when my phone rang. It was the vet. My stomach dropped. "Congressman," Dr. Hughes said, her voice tight. "It's about Max. You'd better come now." I was already out of my chair before she finished the sentence, the folder still in my hand. I didn't know if I was about to walk into good news or a goodbye, but I did know that whatever happened next, Karen had just given me another reason to make sure her reign of control ended in handcuffs. The drive to the animal hospital felt longer than any cross-country flight I'd ever taken. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles burned. Every red light was an insult, every slow driver ahead of me an obstacle between me and Max. I kept replaying Dr. Hughes's voice in my head, the way it tightened on the word now. When I burst through the clinic doors, the smell of antiseptic hit me like a wall. Dr. Hughes was already waiting in the lobby, her scrubs wrinkled and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "He made it through the night," she said, "but the bullet fractured a rib and caused some internal bleeding. We stabilized him, but if there's any sudden change," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. She led me to the recovery area, where Max lay curled on a thick blanket inside a glass-front kennel. His eyes opened slowly when he saw me, tail thumping weakly against the bedding. I crouched down, pressing my hand gently to his head. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "I'm here. You just keep fighting, okay?" For a few moments, the noise of the world faded away, no HOA wars, no politics, no Karen. Just me and Max, the steady rise and fall of his breathing a reminder that some things were still worth every ounce of fight I had left in me. But reality came crashing back when Dr. Hughes cleared her throat. "There's something else you should know. The officer who dropped by last night said the HOA filed a complaint against you. Claims you endangered the community with a hostile animal." I felt my jaw tighten. "They're building a case before the feds can move in." She gave me a careful look. "Whatever's going on, you'd better move fast. They don't strike me as the type to wait for permission." I thanked her and stayed with Max a little longer, but by the time I walked out into the parking lot, my phone was buzzing. It was Wallace from the DOJ. "We've got something," he said. Financial irregularities in the HOA's bank accounts. Enough to request warrants. When? I asked. Soon. But there's a problem. Someone tipped them off. We think Karen's shredding documents as we speak. I got into my car, adrenaline flooding my veins. Then we're not waiting for warrants. We're getting that binder. There was a pause on the line. Congressman, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, I said, starting the engine, that if she's going to break the law in broad daylight, I'm not sitting around playing by the rules while evidence disappears. The plan was dangerous, maybe reckless. But I had a window, one that was closing fast. The HOA's weekly executive session was that evening, a closed-door meeting Karen never missed. And I knew exactly where she kept that binder during the sessions. If I moved right, I could have it in my hands before she even realized it was gone. But as I pulled onto the main road, my phone lit up with another call, this time from my neighbor, David. His voice was shaking. "Hey, you'd better get back here," he said. "Karen's in your yard. With a tow truck." I gripped the wheel tighter. "What's she towing?" "Your car," he said. "And she's telling everyone it's for non-payment of HOA dues." My mind raced. If she took my car, I'd lose the fastest way to get to that binder tonight. But if I stayed and fought this in the open, I'd lose my shot at the one thing that could bring her down for good. I took the next turn hard, tires squealing, my heart pounding as I decided which battle to fight first. I floored the accelerator, making it back into Lakewood Estates in record time. The tow truck was already half hooked to my car, its hydraulic lift whining as it began to raise the front wheels. Karen stood beside it like a queen watching a siege, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, phones out, recording every second. I pulled up and jumped out before the truck driver could finish. "Touch my car, and you'll be explaining to a federal judge why you're interfering with an active investigation," I said loud enough for every phone to pick it up. Karen's lips curled into a smug smirk. "This isn't about your so-called investigation. This is about you refusing to pay your HOA dues for the last quarter. Rules are rules, Congressman." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. "You really want to play this game while the Department of Justice is watching? Go ahead. Every stunt you pull makes my case stronger." Her eyes flickered for just a moment, the first crack in her wall, but she quickly masked it. "Remove it," she snapped at the driver. "We'll come back with an official court order." The driver shrugged and unhooked the lift. As the crowd dispersed, I knew I'd just bought myself a little time. Not much, but enough to make my next move. Back inside my house, I grabbed a small GoPro camera, my phone, and a set of gloves. If I was going to get that binder tonight, I needed every second to count. I spent the afternoon mapping out Karen's habits. I'd seen her lock the binder in the HOA office's top drawer before walking into meetings. The office was in a converted garage at the back of the community hall, with a keypad lock I'd watched her punch in more than once. 7-4-2-9, I'd memorized it weeks ago. By the time the sun dipped low, I was parked 2 streets away, dressed in dark jeans and a plain jacket. I watched as HOA members trickled into the hall for the executive session, Karen striding in last with the binder hugged to her chest. Perfect. I slipped in through the side gate, keeping low until I reached the back of the hall. My gloves muffled the sound as I tapped in the code. The door clicked open. Inside, the dim light smelled of paper and dust. There it was, the top drawer of the desk, now unlocked. I pulled it open and lifted the heavy blue binder. The moment I flipped it open, my pulse kicked into overdrive. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Payments to consultants that matched the names of relatives. Even a few envelopes of cash receipts. All of it signed by Karen. I snapped photos of every page, working fast, my hands moving on instinct. But just as I reached the last section, I froze. There was an envelope with my name on it. I slid it open and pulled out a single printed sheet. A fabricated incident report claiming Max had attacked a child, complete with a doctored photo and a forged witness signature. She'd been building this for months, planning to destroy my credibility before I could even fight back. I stuffed the envelope into my jacket just as a door creaked somewhere in the hall. Voices were getting closer, too close. If they caught me here, binder in hand, I'd be the one explaining myself to the police before the feds ever saw this evidence. I shut the drawer, binder back in place, and slipped toward the exit. My hand was on the knob when I heard it, Karen's voice, right outside the door. "We'll have him out of this neighborhood by the end of the week." The knob in my hand felt suddenly heavier. I had two choices: open the door and bluff my way past her, or stay hidden and risk being trapped inside with the one person I wanted to see in handcuffs. I froze, my back pressed against the wall, every muscle in my body screaming for me to move. Karen's footsteps were slow, deliberate, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction as she continued, "Once he's gone, we can reallocate the HOA funds without interference." That was all I needed to hear. I yanked the door open and stepped out so fast she nearly stumbled backward. "Hope you enjoyed your little closed-door meeting, Karen," I said, my voice cold. "Because it's the last one you'll be holding here." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, headlights cut across the parking lot. 3 black SUVs rolled up in formation, engines rumbling. Doors flew open and agents in DOJ jackets stepped out, flanking the building like a precision strike team. Special Agent Wallace emerged from the lead vehicle, holding up a thick sheaf of papers. "Karen Whitfield," he called out. "We have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying records, and obstruction of justice." The color drained from her face, but she tried one last desperate play. "This is a misunderstanding. She jabbed a finger toward me, he broke into the HOA office. Wallace cut her off with a smirk. "We know. He was working with us. And thanks to his evidence, we've uncovered more than enough to put you away for a very long time." The agents closed in, cuffing her hands behind her back as the neighbors began spilling out from their porches, phones recording every second. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Some even clapped. I didn't stick around for the spectacle. I walked straight to Wallace and handed him the envelope with my name on it. "This is her attempt to frame me. Make sure it's in the record." He nodded. "It already is." As Karen was loaded into the back of the SUV, she twisted in her seat to glare at me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I stepped closer, just enough so only she could hear. "No, Karen. You will." The door slammed shut, and the convoy pulled away into the night. The next morning, the headlines exploded: HOA president arrested in federal corruption probe, tied to attack on Congressman's service dog. The story went national in less than an hour. My office phone lit up with calls from reporters, advocacy groups, and fellow lawmakers. But the only call I cared about came from Dr. Hughes. "He's ready to come home," she said, and I swear I hadn't breathed that deeply in weeks. When I walked into the clinic, Max was already on his feet, tail wagging slow but steady. He limped toward me, pressing his head against my leg. I knelt, holding him close, feeling the weight of every moment since that gunshot tore our lives apart. We walked out into the sunlight together, a little battered, a little slower, but whole. Neighbors waved. Some stopped to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Others thanked me for standing up to Karen. I didn't tell them the full truth. That her arrest had set off a chain reaction, exposing corruption in half a dozen other HOAs across the state. That the investigation would lead to policy reforms and new federal oversight on homeowners associations. All I said was, kindness isn't weakness. But it does make the fight worth it. That night, sitting on my porch with Max at my feet, I thought about everything we'd endured. The harassment. The lies. The bullet. And I realized something Karen never understood: power built on fear will always crumble. Because the moment people stop being afraid of you, you lose everything. And she had lost it all.